thanks to everyone for joining. Obviously, quality has been very top of mind for buyers and sellers of sample for a very long time, but I would say the last year has been incredibly challenging for the industry. And when Ray and I chatted earlier about getting together for this webinar, we thought this was certainly an important topic for us to cover. And I've been in the industry for over 20 years. The lion's share of it, like I said before, has been spent on looking at sample quality, understanding the threats that exist, and really understanding that sample quality exists on a spectrum, right? On one end, you have those very nefarious agents. In the middle, you might have people that are real human beings, but are quite overzealous and hyperactive, taking many surveys and almost acting or serving as a professional survey taker versus a very authentic, real participant. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you might just have natural duplication if you're multi-sourcing across a multitude of vendors. So there's a lot of different scenarios here. But for the benefit of this particular presentation, we're going to be focused on that very far end, really scrutinizing the nefarious agents and trying to understand what it is they're doing on their end to thwart the various controls that are in place. So I want to drop a few stats and factoids to really set the stage and create some context. Certainly these figures aren't meant to scare, but I am an absolute realist, and I think it's very important that we have this level of context. And so I follow Cybersecurity Ventures quite closely. They're an online security firm, and they put out a lot of different fabulous reports, many of which have been featured in Forbes. And this first sort of big headline here, if you were to really combine the damages generated from cyber fraud across the world, across all industry, and put a number behind that, it equates to about $10.5 trillion in damages projected by next year. So it's a very unsettling challenge for all industries, not just those that operate in the market research space. Another, I think, very compelling factoid or stat here is if you were to measure or quantify cyber fraud as a function of GDP or economic wealth, it would be the third largest economy after the US and China. So just let that sink in. This is bigger than all of us, right? And multi-billion-dollar brands, government agencies, and a wide variety of industries are challenged by this. So that's when I kind of put my realist hat on and say that none of us are impervious to these threats. None of us will fully solve them. There is no silver bullet. I'm of the belief system that we have to be really transparent. We have to talk about these challenges and partner together and work together, because there's always going to be noise and dissonance in data. That's kind of the fun bit, but we shouldn't be combing through our data sets trying to figure out who is real and who isn't. And I think there is very much a multi-layered approach that can be embraced both from the supplier and the buyer perspective. But again, if you were to look at the damage, it's exponentially larger than the damage caused by every natural disaster in the world for 1 year, and it's more profitable than every illegal drug trade combined. So again, these stats I think are important for us to kind of get our head around. But I did want to share kind of what's been happening over the last few months. And I went to some experts. I wanted to talk to some leading digital fingerprinting providers, because they have the unique benefit of really having this macro view of the entire ecosystem versus if you were to talk to just one individual company, they may be doing a lot of different things that are quite different from the next company that you evaluate. And so I think it's important to partner with companies like Rep Data as well as Device IQ, because these are leading companies that are really working very closely to help buyers of sample mitigate those risks. And I wanted to understand, what have they been seeing from that macro view? And our friends over at Rep Data said that essentially that fraud is definitely on the rise. There's no secret. They've seen a different type of composition depending on what angle they're looking at. But right now, in terms of the ecosystem data that's within their footprint, they're seeing just shy of 10.5% of duplicates, and then another 11% or so coming in as a high threat. So these are like the very nefarious, very sophisticated fraudsters. When they looked at open-end or text analytics, the total count here is just shy of 6 million. About 3.5% of that equates from a gibberish response, and then close to 1% includes a copy paste, which we're seeing a lot of, but there's certainly things that can be done when it comes to reviewing open ends and even technologies that can be layered on to be really proactive around that piece. And then the third piece is that they're really seeing a lot of professional survey taking activity. And this is a metric that's super important because, again, it's going to give you a wider sense or a more footprint view of what's happening across the industry and what these users might be doing in other survey environments. But the average activity in terms of survey attempts that they're seeing across their ecosystem is just 5 surveys within a 24-hour period. But the max activity, which is just shocking to me, is 667 survey attempts within a 24-hour period. So you can see there's a lot of volatility. There's participants out there that are operating well, that are participating in an honest way. But then there's folks that are really nefarious in nature and are doing this at scale and doing this as a job to be able to scale their fraudulent efforts and make money. So certainly very concerning, but big thanks to the Rep Data friends over there to furnish this data for us. And you know, we kind of talk about, well, what's driving this? Where are we seeing themes kind of surface? And you know, from both my conversations with Rep Data as well as Device IQ, we saw from their end a real rise of anti-detect browsers and rotating residential proxies. So we'll get in a little bit of what that means and how that takes shape. But I think the important thing here to remember is that cyber criminals are continuing to evolve their tactics, their techniques, and the things that they're doing, the procedures that they're employing, and they're constantly iterating on that. So what they may have done yesterday, they're not going to do today or tomorrow. And that's challenging for businesses, right? Businesses are built on having a stable tech stack, having standardized SOPs, having standard process and procedure in order to move that ship through the water. And you know, that dynamic and unpredictable nature that the fraudsters are displaying is very difficult for business to keep up with, especially if those businesses are performing on a very large quantitative scale when it comes to traffic, you know, really procuring the traffic and then delivering the traffic into its respective survey. The other thing that's kind of happening right now as well is there's a lot of new tools that are hitting the market that these fraudsters are taking advantage of. It's a new breed of tools that are really helping the fraudsters reduce their costs, which is great for them and bad for us. In fact, there's probably about 30 tools that we've evaluated on our side that we know the fraudsters are using. We've even gone as far as interviewing fraudsters. Ray, you might remember we presented some interviews with fraudsters. They were obviously anonymous, but we had actually interviewed them and presented that at SMR Congress a few years back. And that, I think, definitely helped to serve as an impetus to wake up the industry that these folks are very creative. They're leveraging new tools, and these same tools are adding many features. So it's creating this one-stop shop dynamic to really help automate those capabilities, as well as emulate you know, and pretend to be a real respondent. But there's been a significant uptick in terms of the percentage of traffic going undetected by existing fraud prevention tools. So if you're just relying on digital fingerprinting, yes, that's going to catch some bad actors and I would say more innocent strains of fraud where maybe people don't realize they've been invited to the same survey because they might belong to more than one panel company. But solely relying on IP address is absolutely no longer sufficient and a recipe for disaster. So we'll move on to the next slide here. A little buggy for me, Ray, so hopefully it moves along here momentarily. Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about anti-detect browsers and rotating residential proxies. And essentially how this all takes shape. And like I said before, we've seen a significant increase in this type of activity, but essentially it allows you to create a unique profile and to look different from a device property standpoint. And so it really allows them to set natively in the browser source code. So respondents look different and unique. but are able to avail of those bad actions from one centralized machine. So they could take those actions from a basic device like a tablet and launch thousands of unique device and browser profiles based on that. And it's really providing advanced IP address anonymization. So it's able to route internet traffic through proxy servers and effectively hiding the user's actual IP address and replacing it with a different one. And so that is something that's really challenging, because historically we had those sight lines, and now with the rise of anti-detect browsers, which again are being presented from a privacy standpoint, that it's helping users to remain private and keep their personal information private, which you can certainly appreciate, but it's also being leveraged by those that have nefarious intentions, and they are able to essentially emulate unique profiles across seemingly thousands of unique devices, when in fact it's all coming from one central machine. In terms of residential rotating proxies, this is essentially what happens when a user chooses a specific location, country, city, or carrier, and they surf the web as a real user in that area using a real household or mobile IP address. So the rotating residential proxies really allow you to change that IP address on demand or automatically in each transaction with your target location. So if there's a survey in the UK that a US-based person really wants to take, it's not difficult or challenging for them to emulate that they are in fact in the UK when they're taking that survey from some state in the US, as an example. So it really is replacing the use of traditional, more expensive and easily detectable VPNs and data centers and web proxies that would have been used in years past, and really helping to advance their efforts. And we'll move on to the next slide here. And so I want to talk a little bit about survey farms, because I think survey farms have been something that's been in the headlines for a long time. You sort of envision this big room of loads of people all taking surveys. And that certainly was the case a few years ago, but those large groups of individuals all coordinating and collaborating together are really no longer needed. You can simply define thousands of browser profiles to use in order to represent all those people, and all be one single individual at the same time. So they can target desktop, tablet, mobile phones. They can use popular browsers that businesses would expect to see, as well as implement multiple operating systems. Again, these are all variables or features that a lot of digital fingerprinting systems and other fraud mitigation tools have used in the past as a means to find and exclude those users. But unfortunately, nowadays it's very easy to emulate and create that variability that fraud mitigation tools are expecting to see, when in fact they are not unique. They are all coming from the same person. And survey farms are obviously mirroring browser clicks and open-end responses from one browser profile to another. They're really easy to automate entering into a survey from all the different browser profiles. So it may look like a survey farm, but in fact it can be from one individual. And the sad thing here is that you don't have to be some uber tech expert in order to hide your identity, emulate the fact that you're many different browser profiles or many different respondents. You're able to do that from a single laptop and leverage these rotating residential proxies to essentially automate that SPSF GPS spoofing that's occurring. And you don't have to be super technically savvy. So a lot of people are getting in on the action, which is certainly very disappointing to see. So our friends over at DFIQ had a keen focus on this area in last year. They really saw this from evaluating open-end responses and seeing a lot of anomalies in the data. And so they've really, I think, done a great job with their updated release last year, their 5.2 release that's been tested and is now detecting all known anti-detect browsers, which is excellent and really great to see. And each of their releases over the last year or so have seen a significant rise in fraud detection rates, with their 5.2 release seeing the highest increase of 6%, which is just fantastic. And based on my discussions with them and feedback from them, their conservative estimate of anti-detect browser attributed fraud is currently 30% of overall fraud traffic. So it is significant and concerning. So lots to sort of digest there and think about. I know I'm looking here at the chat and I see I might be scaring some folks, and I'm sorry for that, but I think it's so important for us to be open and transparent and talk about some of these threats so that we can be proactive and we can work together and really partner together. And I know, speaking from my own perspective as the CEO of NewMR, and we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, which is just fantastic. We have been studying this stuff for a long time. We've done a lot of research on research, and we have 40+ layers in place because you have to. There is no silver bullet, I promise you. There's no kind of quick fix for this. It's really about acknowledging that this is a challenge, not only for our industry, but other industries. And there are actual things that we can be doing. There's initiatives that are really great that are happening in the industry right now. In fact, I'm on the steering committee for the Global Data Quality Initiative, which is just fantastic. It involves SMR and SampleCon, the MRS, and the Insights Association all coming together. And there's several different committees off of that that are working on defining, standards across the industry and working on unified definitions so that we're all speaking the same vernacular and all speaking the same language. Also really promoting the use of full encrypted links. Again, I think that's sort of the bare minimum that we have to do as an industry and will serve as a deterrent for these nefarious agents, but there's so much more that needs to be done. And I want to close this presentation with just a kind of a quick bulletin here that there are a lot of phishing attacks that are hitting our industry. And this is a real live example that I'm showing you. It hit the industry a few weeks back. With this sort of bid request, right? You, as a sales rep, you see a bid request come in. What are you going to do? You're going to click on that link because you're eager to hit your quota and respond back to the client in a timely manner. But it's so important to make sure that you train your staff and train them early on day one of onboarding. Any new employees that start at your business, make sure that you're giving them great training on what to look out for. Things like, the actual email domain. Does it match the trusted sender that you think this is coming from? Or is it off by a character or two? Is there a link asking you to go through, a credential process or a multi-factor authentication process? Do not click on those links. Make sure you validate with the trusted sender that you think this is coming from, and expect to get more of these. And what's scary is it can actually, based on this sort of methodology that these bad actors are performing, it can give them access to your computer, your inbox, all of your contacts, copies of your invoices for them to then take, emulate, change the banking details. So it's pretty scary. And there's been a ton of CEO spoofing as well. So I always tell my team, if you ever get a rogue email from someone pretending to be me and asking you to go purchase Apple gift codes, it's not me. We will always do a voice and video verify for requests like that. So I would just like to finish that, Ray and Alexandra, as sort of a little warning for others, just to be really, really thoughtful and mindful about these attempts because they are absolutely increasing at a dramatic rate. And that's it for me.
Thanks, Lisa. And I'm just going to try to respond to one question out there about just blowing up that screen a little bit. And hopefully that's about as big as I can get it. So fantastic, Lisa. Really scary. Why do you think that only the panel companies seem to be worried about this? Why are the people buying the research? So the agencies who buy the research, the end clients who buy the research seem to be much less concerned than they should be.
I think historically it's always been seen as a panel problem. And I think a lot of buyers of samples sort of are very binary in the way that they view it. There's good vendors and bad vendors. I just don't think it works that way. If you work in the sample space, you are absolutely going to run into agents that are looking to spoof and pretend to be something that they're not. And so I think it is really critical. And I think it does come down to education and communication, having great sessions like this, Ray, to really get the word out. But for us to really make an impact, I think we all need to work together. Sample companies have a lot to do on their end, in my opinion, but also buyers of sample need to be putting in those in-survey checks and really scrutinizing the data set closely to produce something they can be really proud of. And, I would say not all vendors are created equal. There are definitely sample providers out there that are just leaning on digital fingerprinting, and I think that's a really dangerous strategy. So to me, it's really about looking at things outside of just technological tactics, but also looking at behavioral and attitudinal assessments, comparing them against known benchmarks, scrutinizing open-end data. And even I think there's an opportunity to use synthetic data to help even validate real data. So sort of a reverse engineering, but I'm sure we're going to get into the topic of synthetic data. I know we're tight on time, so I'll stop talking.
So I'm just going to respond to a lovely correction, actually in the chat. Of course, some agencies are massively concerned about it. Some end clients are massively concerned. Procter & Gamble have done a lot over the years, but a lot are not. And it only requires a lot of not very active buyers for this problem really to just keep moving along, I feel. What about using routers and blenders? Is there ever a good method of checking what's happening if you're buying sample that's really coming from 5 or 6 or 7 different suppliers?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of multi-sourcing that's happening, Ray, right? Like, I think a lot of projects that are being conducted right now are very challenging. They're very low incidence populations. So as a buyer, you maybe don't even have a choice to single source, nor would you want to, right? You want to diversify so you have some optionality. I can certainly appreciate that. I was a buyer of sample for many years as well. So I've sat on both sides of the fence. Routers in general are a slippery slope, in my opinion. Not just for the fatigue that it can create among real participants, which can be a deterrence for real people to participate if they feel like they're getting stuck in that washing machine and failing over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, our conversion rate as an industry is sub 10%. That means we're failing out of surveys 9 out of 10 times. That's not an enjoyable experience. So, I understand the impetus for routers, but I think there's a balance that needs to happen. And I also think we need to be very aware of response bias and the prioritization schema that is included in a lot of these routers, so that you actually have non-response bias coming into play when people don't get an opportunity to participate at an equalized level. Let's say. So there's a lot of, I could probably talk. We could do a whole webinar on routers.
Oh, yes.
We really could. So we'll leave that there for now.
And Melanie Courtwright of the Insights Association has a very good pitch and discussion about that as well. And she was with Research Now and is now, of course, head of the Insights Association, very much involved in the Global Data Quality Initiative. And just to echo what Lisa was saying, please do find out about that and move forward. Interesting question in the Q&A tool. Is the rise in some of these clever things that Alexandra's been talking about, the chatbots and the AI, going to make it harder to spot fraud or easier? Or both?
I think it's going to be easier to catch fraud, because now we're working with a lot more, call it unstructured data or open-end responses. And, if you study those open ends and those verbatims long enough, you can really discern who is engaged, who's providing you a really robust response, and who is just kind of going through the motions, or even using ChatGPT to help generate responses. There are technological solutions to catch that, to catch the copy pasting, to catch, the character count check, for example. So I think new technology, new techniques are really going to help us get that much smarter, versus, say, just a typical close-ended tick box type of survey instrument where it's easier for the fraudsters to emulate humanistic behavior.
So there's a question that on the chat that I'm not going to answer in depth, because I don't want to run any legal risks, about who would we recommend. Obviously, Innovate MR, because of your willingness to stand up. I would say anybody who is answering the SMR questions on the website is worth investigating, but I will put in my standard tip to buyers, which is pick a good panel company, develop a personal relationship with somebody who works there, so that they are invested in your success. And I think having that where you can talk and say, what can I do to make it better? Are there other ways I could be approaching this? And having that conversation as opposed to sending an RFQ off to 20 agencies, then I think that is a better way of moving forward.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice, Ray.
Um, I personally haven't seen
Alexandra,
many.
yes.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to circle back to your point about whether clients care or not. So I personally haven't seen many questions on tenders or rosters that would specifically call out survey fraud and what we could do to combat that. Do you have do you think clients need to demand that information in rosters and tenders and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the SMR guidebook that came out was sort of a continuation of the SMR 28, the online, I think it's online buyer guide. Is that what it's called, Ray? I might be getting the actual
Mm.
name of it wrong, but that's a really robust list of questions that I think can serve as a great
Mm.
guide for buyers of sample who maybe aren't as familiar with some of these threats. It provides a lot of context on why those questions have been included, and think that's a great place to start. But certainly, getting real with your vendors and really talking about what those threats are and what each side of the equation can do to mitigate those risks. Because I think there's this notion that there's some silver bullet or some quick fix, and there isn't. And you could have two surveys side by side. One is plagued with fraud, and one is completely safe. And it just depends on the incentive that's being offered. And so typically those harder to reach audiences, B2B studies as well, or the younger cohorts that we talked about earlier, those, more marginalized cohorts, diverse cohorts, those groups do get targeted by the fraudsters because they know they're high demand and low supply. So those types of surveys, I think, are definitely going to be a high target for the fraudsters. And so having a really great partnership with your vendor and putting together lots of layers and scrutiny is going to be super key as we move forward. And as we continue to evolve and become more sophisticated with our research methodologies and embrace Gen AI and other techniques and all that offers, I think the fraudsters are getting more advanced as well, and they're getting more sophisticated. So it's really important to put your best foot forward.
So, unless there is anything else, I think we're all good. A big thank you to Lisa, Alexandra, and of course, all of you. Big thank you to all of our sponsors. Big thank you to anybody out there who's one of our patrons. You're much appreciated. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon.